Station Houston and 2 confirmed a 30-meter hold and then set up and brief for the capture per step 8 in 1.102.
Houston, step 8's in where?
This is Mission Control Houston. From the ground here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room, confirming a good 30-meter hold. HTV will remain in this position through the orbital nighttime, so for just about 40 or 45 minutes. You're getting a view from the workstation that astronaut Chris Cassidy and Roscosmos cosmonaut Ivan Wagner are taking a look at as they monitor the approach of HTV towards the International Space Station, seeing those final glimpses of sunlight as HTV and International Space Station cross completely into darkness, 263 statute miles over the North Pacific Ocean. This is Mission Control Houston. You're seeing the cameras on the outside of the International Space Station reconfiguring. And the bottom of the screen there, you see the station's Canadarm2 poised, ready to capture the HTV as it departs the 30-meter hold point and heads towards that capture position about 10 or 12 meters away. HTV still holding at the 30-meter mark. There'll be a go, no-go poll from the team led here in Mission Control Houston, working with international flight control teams, including HTV Flight Control in Tsukuba, Japan, making sure everything is good for that final maneuver of HTV towards its capture position. HTV's arrival comes at the perfect time, arriving with critical consumable supplies, spare batteries to upgrade the outside of the International Space Station. and of course many research experiments ahead of a new crew launching to the International Space Station from American shores for the first time in 9 years. Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley will be launching on top of the SpaceX Crew Dragon vehicle from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida on the Demo 2 mission. This will come just 2 days from now, May 27th, 2020. The duo are set to lift off from the Kennedy Space Center at 4:33 p.m. Central Time. We'll be live for the pre-launch coverage for about 4 hours, even a little bit before that, 4.5 hours before launch. Make sure you tune in to our live coverage on NASA TV in tandem with SpaceX to cover the mission. Everything that's led up to this point to launch Crew once again from the United States. Again, that's May 27th, 2020, 4:33 p.m. Eastern Time, 3:33 p.m. Central Time. Everything's still on track from the HTV side of things. Again, we're continuing to hold 30 meters, just about 100 feet from the International Space Station. Everything's right on track for the scheduled capture time, just about an hour from now, 7:15 a.m. Central Time, 8:15 a.m. Eastern. This is Mission Control Houston. If you are just tuning in, the HTV cargo vehicle, HTV-9, holding at 30 meters away from the International Space Station. In just a few minutes, led from here in Mission Control Houston by Flight Director Marcos Flores, flight control teams from around the globe will conduct a go, no-go poll to depart the 30-meter hold point. Departure of that 30-meter hold is scheduled just about 20 minutes from now. Again, all the flight control teams will verify that everything is go, and everything has been checked out to make sure that HTV can safely depart the 30-meter hold point and head towards the capture position.
Is complete. The crew is ready for HTV approach to the capture point.
And we copy.
You heard good words from the International Space Station. That was NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy, Space Station Commander of Expedition 62. And the lead for HTV's rendezvous at the controls of the station's robotic arm, confirming the station crew's ready for HTV to depart that 30-meter hold point, head towards the capture position. It'll be Cassidy himself at the controls of the station's robotic arm. He'll be maneuvering the robotic arm, heading in to capture the HTV vehicle, coming in at a total of about 12 tons. Again, we have good confirmation from the International Space Station crew to depart the 30-meter hold point, still conducting that go, no-go poll from here in Mission Control Houston. The next milestone you'll hear is the Capcom here in Mission Control Houston. Leslie Ringo read out to the crew of a good no-go for that 30-meter depart, scheduled just about 20 minutes from now. This is Mission Control Houston. HTV still holding at 30 meters. Inside about 4 tons total of cargo, including the pressurized section containing water resupply tanks, research experiments, and nitrogen tanks. In the unpressurized compartment is a pallet full of lithium-ion batteries and associated adapter plates that will be used to upgrade the station's power configuration. Of the 8 channels of the 8 power channels on board station, 6 have been upgraded with lithium-ion batteries. This pallet carried on HTV-9 will be used to upgrade the final 2 power channels of the International Space Station. This is the final flight of a berthing HTV. The next generation of HTV spacecraft will be the HTV-X, with the ability to dock to the International Space Station, heading into the international docking adapters that are located on the forward end of the International Space Station. Some hardware aboard HTV-9 is being tested now to verify that next generation technology, including an experiment called WILD. Some of the same hardware will be used on HTV-X, WILD is a wireless interface. It will be testing Wi-Fi and data transmission to some of the external wireless ports that are outside the International Space Station, testing that Wi-Fi connection, making sure that telemetry and data has a good transmission using that technology. This is Mission Control Houston, HTV still holding steady about 30 meters away from the International Space Station. This is the final hold point before it goes into its capture position. What you're seeing now is the view of the crew aboard the International Space Station. Chris Cassidy, the International Space Station commander, and Yvonne Wagner monitoring telemetry from the International Space Station's Cuckoo. This is a workstation that provides telemetry of visiting vehicles as they approach the International Space Station. The crew reported a good hold and is ready for HTV to depart the 30-meter hold. International Space Station Flight Director Marcos Flores still holding a go, no-go poll from flight control centers across the globe, making sure everything's good for HTV to depart that 30 meters. Departure scheduled just about 10 minutes from now. Right before an orbital sunrise, we may even see a little bit of light reflecting off of HTV's solar panels as it departs 30 meters and heads towards that capture position. Capture's still right on track, 7:15 a.m. Central Time, 8:15 a.m. Eastern.
Station Houston and 2, HTV is ready to proceed to the capture point. Expect approach to resume shortly.
We copy.
This is Mission Control Houston and right on track. Flight control teams across the globe are go to depart the 30-meter hold point. From this view that you're seeing now on the bottom right column of telemetry, you see range and range rate. Once you see that start to increase, it'll be the way to tell that HTV is moving slowly but surely towards its capture position. Again, flight control teams and the crew aboard the International Space Station are go to depart that 30-meter hold point. We'll start seeing HTV make its way a little bit closer to the International Space Station on the final approach towards the capture position. It'll be about 10 or 12 meters away from the International Space Station. Right now, station and HTV flying in sync, 263 statute miles over the middle of the Pacific Ocean in an orbital nighttime. Should expect a sunrise and maybe even some sun reflecting off of HTV here in about 8 to 10 minutes.
Station Houston and 2, HTV has begun approach from 30 meters. Monitor per step 9 and 1.102.
Step 9 in work.
This is Mission Control Houston. HTV has resumed its approach towards the International Space Station, heading towards its capture position. You notice the rate is much slower than it was approaching the 30-meter hold point. Now crawling at about 0.02 meters per second. HTV 28 meters and closing. A good rate, right on track to arrive at its capture position a little less than 20 minutes from now. And puts us right on the timeline for the expected 7:15 a.m. Central Time capture. Now heading into an orbital daytime. Space Station and HTV 266 statute miles over the South Pacific Ocean. Sun beginning to rise as HTV makes its way from 30 meters towards its capture position.
Houston Station with a Block Bravo update coming through 25 meters on the nav range. The light is within the corridor. The vehicle size matches the outline. The light is inside the circle, and the circle is at the crosshairs on both monitors, looking very nice.
Copy all, and that is a perfect report.
HTV closing in on 20 meters from the International Space Station. Just about halfway on its trip from the 30-meter hold point towards its capture position. Everything right on the timeline, heading towards capture arrival, or a capture point arrival, about 13 minutes from now. An estimated capture time of 7:15 a.m. Central Time, 8:15 a.m. Eastern. Now in a handover of some of the audio and visual communications and telemetry and data from the International Space Station. This is a look of the inside of the International Space Station Flight Control Room. Teams here monitoring the approach of HTV and of course the systems and the crew aboard the International Space Station. Teams here working in tandem with HTV Flight Control over in Tsukuba, Japan. This team been watching over the HTV vehicle since it launched just 5 days ago and staffing its 5-day rendezvous. Of course, all wearing masks as a protective measure against COVID-19 as they continue to monitor HTV's approach. A flight right on the timeline. Again, heading for a capture at 7:15 a.m. Central Time. That'll be the final time HTV is captured aboard the International Space Station. Next generation of HTV vehicles upgraded for docking. That'll be the HTV-X vehicle. Onboard HTV-9, though, is an experiment called WILD. It'll be testing the wireless communication of the future generation of HTV towards the International Space Station, testing a Wi-Fi connection to the external wireless capability of Space Station, transmitting data and making sure that connection is good for that next generation of HTV spacecraft. This is a live view of HTV, still heading towards that capture position, slowly but surely, 16 meters and closing. Space Station and HTV, just about 270 statute miles right over the southern end of the Andes mountain chain.
Station Block Bravo coming through 15 meters on the nav range. The lights within the quarter. The vehicle the vehicle size matches the outline. The light is inside the circle, and the circle is on the crosshairs. All looking good.
Copy. Another perfect report at 15 meters.
A great view of HTV as it crosses over the southern tip of South America, heading towards the east coast and into an orbital daytime over the South Atlantic Ocean. In view is the HTV about 14 meters away from the International Space Station, closing in to its capture position, scheduled just about 8 minutes from now. In view is the Japanese experiment module and the Japanese exposed facility, and of course the Japanese HTV, heading towards the Canadian robotic arm aboard the International Space Station. HTV poised a little under 12 meters from station, slowing down but still making its way towards the capture position just a few minutes from now. HTV continuing to slow down just a little more than 10 meters from station now. Right on track for an on-time arrival at the capture position. No changes to the capture time so far, still tracking 7:15 a.m. Central Time, 8:15 a.m. Eastern. Station and HTV flying 270 statute miles in an orbital daytime over the South Atlantic Ocean. Just minutes away from the capture point arrival of HTV, right in front of the station's robotic arm. We're in a short handover now, losing video and audio temporarily from the International Space Station. Should be regaining that shortly. Again, the next milestone will be the arrival of HTV at its capture position. Last we saw was a little under 10 meters from station. Once we get a good confirmed hold at that capture point, the next milestone will be another go, no-go poll to make sure everything is set from the flight control teams here in the room, and of course internationally, before Chris Cassidy aboard the International Space Station takes control of the station's robotic arm, assisted by Ivan Wagner of Roscosmos. He'll take control of the robotic arm and maneuver the arm towards the capture interface that's mounted on the outside of HTV for a good capture. Once a hard capture is confirmed of the 12-ton vehicle, Cassidy will hand over control of the station's robotic arm to robotics officers. It'll take some time for that robotic arm to maneuver the 12-ton vehicle over to its berthing port. This port located on the nadir or the Earth-facing side of the Harmony module that's at the forward end of the space station. It'll take some time to maneuver that and have all 4 latches go and all 16 bolts in place for a firm berth of HTV to the International Space Station. That all coming up very soon. First, the arrival of HTV at the capture position.
Station Houston and 2, confirm capture point hold per step 10 in 1.102.
Step 10 in work. Houston Station, the capture point is confirmed. The grapple fixture remains within the capsule volume on both camera views.
And we copy.
Crew confirming a good hold of HTV 9.2 meters from the International Space Station. This is a look at the inside of the International Space Station Flight Control Room, led by Flight Director Marcos Flores. Leslie Ringo as the Capcom, the voice you're hearing from here in Mission Control Houston to the crew. Responding is Chris Cassidy, International Space Station Commander. Now that HTV has arrived at its capture point, holding steady, teams here will conduct a go, no-go poll, making sure that everything is looking good before Cassidy takes control of the robotic arm and maneuvers it for a capture of HTV. Everything's still on track for a capture on time today. The schedule has us at 7:15 a.m. Central Time for that capture. Again, 4 tons total of cargo inside HTV. Within the pressurized volume is fresh food, water resupply, and nitrogen resupply, all to restock the International Space Station crew for food and, of course, the consumables aboard the International Space Station. In addition is the unpressurized volume of lithium-ion batteries and adapter plates stacked on an external pallet that'll be removed robotically from HTV once it has been berthed to the International Space Station. There's a pallet now that was delivered on HTV-8, mounted robotically on the outside of the International Space Station. It's loaded with old nickel hydrogen batteries. There'll be a robotic swap of the new pallet full of lithium-ion batteries. Swapping that pallet for the old pallet. Old pallet will be put back into HTV for disposal of the old nickel hydrogen batteries. Those lithium-ion batteries will be mounted outside the International Space Station, ready for installation through spacewalks on the starboard 6 truss of the International Space Station, completing the upgrades of the final 2 power channels of the International Space Station. And here it is. We're getting those views back from the TDRS satellites, the tracking and data relay satellites that provide us this high-definition view from the International Space Station. There it is, HTV-9, holding at its capture position, 9.2 meters away from the International Space Station. You see the robotic arm there to the bottom left of your screen. HTV's flight is done, now just holding at the capture position. The rest of the work to be done by Chris Cassidy aboard the International Space Station.
Step is enabled. Prepare for capture for step 11 in 1.102.
Step 11 in work.
There you have it, Capcom Leslie Ringo confirming to put forward the work of configuring the arm. Chris Cassidy performing that work now, aided by Yvonne Wagner of Roscosmos.
The LED status matches the procedure. The capture prep confirmed, and the crew is ready for the HTV capture.
Copy. Stand by for capture.
This is Mission Control Houston. You heard good words from the crew aboard the International Space Station. Their view of HTV and all the telemetry they're receiving has them go. Now conducting a go-no-go poll here in Mission Control Houston. International teams now conducting a go-no-go poll to depart to have Chris Cassidy maneuver for capture.
Station Houston and 2, Chris, you are go for HTV capture sequence. Execute step 4 in robotics procedure 1.110 HTV capture and begin monitoring the backaway cue card.
Copy, go for capture sequence step 4 and work.
There you have it. International Space Station flight control teams from across the globe go for capture of HTV this morning, right on time. Cassidy now configuring the arm for capture. From this view, you can see it move towards the HTV. Cassidy still configuring that arm. HTV and International Space Station approaching the southwestern coast of Africa now. This is Mission Control Houston. If you're just tuning in, HTV holding steady at its capture position, 9.2 meters from the station. Chris Cassidy aboard the International Space Station, NASA astronaut and International Space Station commander, aided by Yvonne Wagner of Roscosmos, configuring the station's robotic arm that you see poised to the bottom left of your screen for capture of HTV-9 this morning. Estimated time of capture is about 7:15 a.m. Central Time. Starting to see some movement of the robotic arm. HTV configured for free drift. Robotic arm closing into HTV about 4 meters away. Heading in for an early capture of HTV today. Arm is 3 meters away. HTV now confirmed in free drift. Arm is 2 meters away. Stand by for contact. One meter from capture. Arm is over the pin. Good trigger. Snare is closed. Standing by for confirmation of capture. And we have capture confirmed, 7:13 a.m. Central Time. HTV and the International Space Station were 260 miles.
Post-capture reconfiguration. It was an honor for Expedition 63 to be part of the final HTV mission, a vehicle that has contributed so greatly to the International Space Station program. Congratulations to our friends and colleagues in Scuba.
And Chris and Ivan, congratulations on an excellent job capturing Kanatori. From the first arrival of JAXA's HTV cargo ship on September 17, 2009, this invaluable resource from our Japanese partners has delivered vital supplies, experiments, and new batteries to extend the life of the station. Today's arrival of the final in the series of this genre of HTV vehicles marks a transition to a new and even more capable vehicle in the HTV-X, which will soon make its debut. We congratulate our Japanese colleagues for a magnificent chapter in space station history and wish them all the best in the next phase of resupplying the International Space Station in the years ahead. Chris and Ivan, please stand by one as I hand the comm over to Nemo.
Chris, Ivan, thank you, spasiba, and arigato for the great work. I'd like to echo Leslie's words and relay the message from Tsukuba in Japanese. クリス、イヴァン、キャプチャーしてくれてありがとう。コウノトリに関わったすべてのメンバーが今日無事に9号機が ISS に到着したことを大変喜んでいます。初号機から10年以上にわたりコウノトリの運用を支えてくれた宇宙飛行士、ヒューストンの管制官、国際パートナーの皆様全員に心より感謝申し上げます。コウノトリ9号機ではバッテリーなどのシステム機器、各国の実験機器や生鮮食品を輸送しています。また ISS への最終接近時には将来の自動ドッキング実証に向けてワイルドミッションを行い、コウノトリから撮影した ISS の画像データを伝送することに成功しました。コウノトリとしては9号機がラストフライトですが、さらに能力を向上した次世代の宇宙船 HTV-X を開発しているので楽しみにしていてください。これからもより一層我々の絆が深まっていくことを期待しています。ありがとう。Thank you again for your great work, Chris and Ivan.
ありがとう。
This is Mission Control Houston. HTV-9's flight to the International Space Station is complete. Capture was confirmed at 7:13 a.m. Central Time, 8:13 a.m. Eastern. The station and HTV were 260 statute miles over Tanzania in Africa. You heard congratulatory words from Chris Cassidy as well as Leslie Ringo, the Capcom here in Mission Control Houston. This is the final flight of HTV to be captured by the station's robotic arm. The next generation of HTV will dock to the International Space Station. You also heard some congratulatory words in Japanese from Norishige Kanai here in Mission Control Houston, a veteran JAXA astronaut that flew to the station on Expedition 5455 back in 2017-2018. With HTV's capture now complete, the 4 tons of cargo will be maneuvered to its berthing position on the nadir-facing side. That's the Earth-facing side of Harmony. Control of the robotic arm has been handed over from Chris Cassidy, who used the station's robotic arm to capture HTV today at 7:13 a.m. Central. Robotics officers on the ground will work together to maneuver HTV into its berthing port. We'll bring you some live coverage of berthing and the activities there to officially mate HTV to the International Space Station via berthing for the final time. Again, the next generation of HTV spacecraft will dock. You can tune in at 8:30 a.m. Central Time, 9:30 a.m. Eastern to tune in to our coverage as we take you through the installation of HTV to space station for the last time. HTV is delivering some vital cargo to the International Space Station. Importantly is the upgrades of batteries to the outside of the International Space Station, as well as almost 5,000 pounds of cargo, including some fresh food for the crew, some resupply of station consumables, and some critical hardware. This comes right before the launch of humans from American soil for the first time in 9 years on the SpaceX Demo 2 mission. You can tune in on Wednesday, May 27th, just 2 days from now, for our live coverage of that historic event. We'll be live on NASA TV at 11:15 a.m. Central Time, 12:15 p.m. Eastern. Launch scheduled for 3:33 p.m. Central, 4:33 p.m. Eastern. That'll wrap up our coverage of HTV-9's flight to the International Space Station. This is Mission Control Houston.
And that may have been a small one for Neil, but that's a long one for me. Boy, you'll never believe it. That's what I see sitting on the side of the crater. The old surveyor, huh? The old surveyor, yes, sir. Does that look neat? It can't be any further than 600 feet from here.
Station, this is Houston. Are you ready for the event?
Houston, this is a space station. Ready for the event.
Discovery Channel, this is Mission Control Houston. Please call station for a voice check.
Station, this is Discovery Channel. How do you hear me?
Discovery Channel, hello, loud and clear. Well, great to be with you today, Chris.
Thank you very much. Is this Commander Cassidy?
It certainly is, on board the International Space Station.
Sir, it is a pleasure to talk to you. I understand this is probably routine for you, but I have to say this is an amazing experience for me to be able to be communicating with you on the International Space Station by telephone. Really, really fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me start by asking you how it's like for you in space. What adjustments do you make? And what do you miss most about being home?
Well, it's always fun to be here. You know, as astronauts, we're preparing and training for space missions our whole career. And I've been an astronaut for 15 years, I guess, a little over that. And then this is only my third time in space. So it's not every day that we're here. So we really cherish every minute that we're here. The days are busy. The biggest adjustment, to answer your question directly, is we are following a timeline all day long, and just paying attention to that timeline and being very specific with all the details is different than how you normally live your workday when you're on Earth. On Earth, you generally know the big blocks that you're doing, but nobody's telling you exactly how to do every single activity. And we need to be that particular here on the space station. So that's the biggest adjustment. And what do I miss most about Earth? I think it's the smells, wonderful smells that you have on Earth that we just kind of take for granted, coming out of the kitchen or of the ocean, the fresh grass. Those kind of things are things that I miss quite often.
That's very well said, Commander. I really appreciate that, and it's something that we do take for granted down here, and something I think you probably look forward to getting back to. Now, you're going to be getting some new roommates in a few days. Are you ready to receive them on the International Space Station?
Well, emotionally, I'm very ready. I'm excited. I can't wait to see them on an actual technical basis. I still have a few more things to do. I want to have a welcoming reception for them. And if you're coming to somebody's house, it's nice if the bed is made. It's nice if there's some food stocked in the pantry. And it's nice if their sheets are clean. So I have to do the analogous things here: tidy up their quarters, find their clothes and put them there. there, organize things a little bit, because I want them to feel welcome and just be ready to roll right in. Launch day is a very tiring day for no matter what vehicle you're launching on. You have a lot of emotion. The launch is kind of generally in the latter part of your day, and then you finally get here, and there'll be some media, a lot of media, and so they'll have gone through a lot of emotion up and downs, and just a long work day. So they'll be ready to relax and have a cup of tea with me and unwind for the night.
That just made me smile, Commander, thinking about you making the beds for the astronauts who will be arriving. That's great. A commander's work is never done, I guess.
It certainly isn't. In fact, when I find myself with idle time, I know that there's something else I should be doing.
Well, being the commander on the International Space Station, I assume you're going to have a list of tasks for Bob and Doug. What will be the first thing you have them do when they arrive?
So, good question. I am the commander of the space station, but I'm not the commander of the plan. The commander of the plan is a team of people on the ground in Houston in conjunction with our international colleagues, and they come together every day in sort of a leading up a few days out, but each day formalize the plan and figure out the priorities. And so the three of us together will really be conquering that plan each day, given whatever the priorities are. If there are some decisions that we need to weigh in as a crew, that's when I'll come in as the commander and say, I think we ought to lean towards this way. But as a whole, it's the three of us working hard together to get the plan done that the ground specialists send up. But to answer your question, what will be the very first thing that we have to do? Right off the bat, we've got to make sure that there's good mechanical leaks, so that even though when the world sees the docking happen, there's still a few hours of technical work before they'll come through the hatch. Then they'll come through the hatch. We'll have some ceremonial activities, public events, and then the cameras will go off, and that's where I'll need to bring them around to the space station, show them the safety equipment, show them where they'll sleep, show them where to go to the bathroom, because they'll need to do that pretty soon. And then just make sure they understand if there's, by chance, some weird emergency in the middle of the night on that first night, they know what to grab and where to go. And so those will be the first actions we do on day one.
You mentioned the docking procedure, Commander, and let's talk a little bit about that. The Crew Dragon is, of course, the latest and greatest in technology. The Demo 1 launch docking went flawlessly. How different is this from previous capsule dockings, such as the Soyuz that you were a part of, the Russian capsule?
Well, there's a lot going on in terms of physics on any rendezvous and docking process. Think about two massive hunks of metal. Fortunately for us, where ours is a little more massive. No, just joking, Bob and Doug. But in all seriousness, these two hunks of metal are going to kind of come together in a very controlled collision, if you will, although we monitor all the parameters very closely. And the Crew Dragon has the top state-of-the-art technology, but all rendezvous are managed with multiple redundant systems. So in terms of our viewpoint on the space station, we don't think anything more than a typical rendezvous. There's always risk that something could go wrong, and there's always risk that we have to pay attention to command the vehicle to retreat if it's not behaving the way we think it is. And we're ready to do that. Of course, Bob and Doug are right there at the controls, so they're primed for anything that goes wrong.
Commander Cassidy, this is truly an historic mission. For the first time in nearly a decade, American astronauts are returning to space on an American rocket. What does that mean for you personally?
Well, it's a great deal of pride for our agency, really, when it comes down to it. It's tough to fly people in space. It's tough to do it safely. It's tough to do it reliably, and it's taken a decade of work to pull all of that together. And this represents so much hard work by so many people around our country, both government and non-government workers. And it just, to me, represents the pride that we should all feel on pulling together a really complex job and getting it to the point where it's a reality. This flight, keep in mind, is a test flight. there was an uncrewed test flight. This is the crewed test flight, and then soon we'll get into regular rotations with the crewed Dragon, and that's going to be really exciting for us as well. This is step one, and for me, it's just all about pride for our country and our great agency of NASA.
Commander Cassidy, do you have any words of encouragement for Bob and Doug before they launch up to the International Space Station?
Yeah, I want to know what food they want waiting, and don't drink too much water in crew quarters before you get on the bus, and just good luck. The whole nation's counting on you. Don't screw it up.
Commander Cassidy, I cannot thank you enough for taking some time to speak with me. It is truly an honor, sir. It is my privilege to have this conversation with you. I know you've got important work to do, so I'm going to let you go. But again, on behalf of everyone down here on Earth, please stay safe, and thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Chris, and the Discovery Channel. We appreciate you being with us today.
Station, this is Houston ACR. That concludes the Discovery Channel portion of the event. Please stand by for a voice check from CBS.
Station, this is CBS. Can you hear me?
Hi, CBS. Loud and clear. This is Chris.
Hello, Chris. Commander Cassidy. Thank you for being with us for a few minutes here. Do I just launch into it? Oh, no, we need a clap first. Can you please start by clapping your hands once near the microphone? It'll help us sync our cameras.
Okay, here you go. Clap.
And then what? And then do the hello. Is that we're coming to this? All right, Commander Chris Cassidy, thank you very much for giving us a few minutes of your time. I know our time is short, so I'm going to get right into it. We're on the brink of a major milestone in spaceflight. In the history of spaceflight up until right now, only countries have put a capsule into orbit and then brought it back. And now we could have a company do it, SpaceX, with two of your colleagues, two American astronauts on board. How big of a deal is this mission?
Oh, it's a gigantic deal. I mean, when we retired the shuttle for very sound reasons when that decision was made with aims to move towards the future, and now the future is here. And how exciting is it? We're putting people into a rocket. My friends, my soon-to-be crewmates, are going to ride on a vehicle from the crew quarters, a SpaceX, or excuse me, a Tesla vehicle out to the pad. They're going to climb into the SpaceX rocket and launch off the pad and get here with all eyes on America, a lot of eyes around the world watching them, because it means so much for the very reasons you just said. It's the stepping point of the next phase of space exploration.
One of the questions when NASA teamed up with commercial companies to try to do something like this was, how will the culture of safety at NASA match up with the corporate ambition of a company like SpaceX? So spaceflight, always risky. Rockets are involved, always risky. How confident are you that as your friends get into that capsule, they're going to arrive there safely?
Oh, I'm very confident. I mean, there's smart engineers at NASA, there's smart engineers at SpaceX, all with motivation to do the same thing. And that's fly missions effectively and safely. Nobody's waking up in the morning trying to figure out how to not do that. And so it gives me great peace of mind to know that there's laser focus on mission accomplishment with a safety aspect to that. I think it's a really cool representation to bring together those two cultures, and I think it's been healthy for both the commercial guys who faster and cheaper, and NASA with a more decades-based of safety culture. I think it's been healthy for the growth of both organizations.
And certainly inspiring as Americans are able to see Americans launch from U.S. soil for the first time in nearly a decade. But this is a really interesting moment for this mission. The coronavirus, as you float there above, is ravaging the country below. What kind of precautions were taken on your journey, and what's being taken to make sure that the crew coming to you now are completely COVID-free?
Yeah, so the timing was a little different. When our crew went into quarantine, it was really just on the baby infancy of the pandemic. And we started quarantine about 2.5 weeks prior to when we would have entered quarantine. So we were isolated in the remote corner of the base in Star City outside of Moscow for a good part of a month and never really interacted outside of that. And then we left and came to the space station. So we're sort of at arm's length from the pandemic the whole time. A little bit different situation for Bob and Doug. They've been around. They've been in the United States for this whole time. They, of course, have been taking precautions with their training. That goes with how they get to the airport, NASA planes, I'm not exactly sure, but not commercial airliners flying back and forth to Hawthorne, California, where they had their final training. And then, of course, they've been tested. I don't know, you'd have to ask them the exact number of times, but they've been tested and will be tested again with the standard coronavirus test prior to getting here. I was joking around with my colleagues, my crewmates last night, and said, hey, maybe we should have them come in through the hatch and make a hard left, and we'll isolate them here in the corner for a couple weeks before we'll treat them to a meal. I don't think we'll be that hardcore. We'll put that onus on the medical team down in Florida.
Yeah, no, and I think in a little bit of a change where you are maybe the safest place in the universe. I mean, talk about social distancing, all those many thousands of miles up. I was hoping you could give us some perspective on what it's been like to be up there, knowing that so much sorrow is going on below with the pandemic. Tens of thousands of people in the U.S. alone dying in the weeks that you've been on this mission. Just what's it like with the wonder of what you're doing and the tragedy of what's going on below?
Yeah, you know, it's a thrill to be here, but just like you said, it puts a little bit of a damper on it, knowing exactly the trials and tribulations that are happening on the Earth. We have the ability, we can't watch any live TV that we want, but the ground has the ability to send us up a channel periodically or record some things. And I have watched news segments, and you see those numbers that I think everybody's watching. And it dawned on me a week ago that every single one of those numbers is a story. It's a family. It's a life, and that really sunk into me. Like, wow, there's a family story of tragedy or happiness if they recover with every one of those numbers that we're watching, and that was impactful to me, particularly as I was looking out the window thinking about it. It's been quite interesting to be here during this pandemic. Our day-to-day life isn't changing on board the space station. We're doing our job, and we're getting our things done, and we're conducting the science and research with the scientists on the ground help. But we're talking on the phone and sending emails with our friends and family who are living it just like you are.
Yeah, Commander Cassidy, I want to sneak in 2 more questions because I know we're running out of time. The first goes to the purpose of space exploration. Elon Musk, the founder of SpaceX, has said that he hopes that we as a species, humans, will become multi-planetary. We'll be able to get off of this planet. The pandemic certainly puts that in perspective, and I'm curious, do you share that goal or that hope? Do you hope that humanity may throw off the bonds of Earth itself?
Oh, absolutely, and I think it's definitely going to happen. It's just a matter of what the time scale is. Is it going to be in my time as an astronaut? Probably not. My children's age, when they become professional astronauts, maybe it's in 100 years, but it's just been a little over 100 years since the Wright brothers flew, and think of where we are now, me talking to you from the space station. So that's quite incredible. And I'll end that thought with, when I first became an astronaut in 2004, John Young, famous astronaut, was still in the office, and I remember him saying, single planet species don't survive. So that has stuck with me all these years, and I agree with John Young.
I wanted to go back to a question I asked earlier and just go with a shorter form. Are you worried about coronavirus as these additional astronauts arrive?
Well, certainly we're worried about it. We have confidence that the testing and the program and the regime that the medical folks are putting Bob and Doug through and the protections that they have will mitigate that as low of a probability as we can. But it would really be something difficult if one of us on board the crew had the virus. It would be. There's no way to isolate each other, so you run a large chance of all 6 of us or all 5 of us getting it. So it's very, very critical that we keep it at 250 miles below us.
And then the last question, as we come up on this historic milestone, 2 Americans coming off of a capsule that lifted off from U.S. soil, first time in nearly a decade. I understand you have an American flag there left by the last Americans who came from U.S. soil. Where is it? What's the plan for passing that flag on?
Good question, and I'm negligent. I should have brought it with me to where I'm standing. It's around the corner, about 40 yards away from me, hanging in the U.S. laboratory. And Doug Hurley was a member of that last shuttle flight to bring the flag up here. Doug Hurley is also, as you know, on this SpaceX flight, and he'll bring that flag home. So he's an integral part of this capture the flag, so to speak. And I think it's a pretty cool story because the flag originated on STS-1 with John Young and Bob Crippen. So it's had quite a bit of space flight experience, this flag has.
All right, well, we wish everybody luck, and I have to say, Commander Cassidy, as I say goodbye, as a Florida boy who grew up watching the space shuttle and the space program, it is truly an honor to talk to you.
I enjoyed my time. All the best to you guys at CBS.
Station, this is Houston ACR. That concludes the CBS portion of the event. Please stand by for a voice check from Houston Chronicle.
Station, this is the Houston Chronicle. How do you hear me?
Hello, Houston Chronicle. Is this Andrea? This is Chris. I hear you loud and clear.
Hi, thank you for being available today. So in a news conference yesterday after landing at Kennedy Space Center, Doug said you sent him an email saying you're excited to see their ugly mugs, his words, not mine. How do you feel about them joining you for 1 to 4 months?
Well, those were my words, not his, and I did send him that email, and I'm just really, really excited to see him. You know, I've enjoyed. I'm here with 2 Russian cosmonauts, and they have busy activities on the Russian side. So largely during the day, I'm by myself here on the U.S. side of the space station, and I'm really looking forward to having a couple crewmates here to help distribute the duties, but also to eat with and laugh with and joke around with. It'll be a great adventure with them.
Okay, and how's it been only having 3 crew members and distributing that workload? What's that been like?
You know, I was describing to my good friend Aki, who's in Mission Control today, actually. I was on the phone with him and saying, you know, that my workday is full, whether I have crewmates on the U.S. side with me or not. You know, you can't cram any more tasks into the time that you have in a given day. But the difference is there's a certain amount of things, like at home, you have to take the trash out to the curb. You have to bring those bins back. You got to get the mail. You have to put gas in your car. And you have to unload the dishwasher. All of those things, maybe there's multiple people in your household to distribute those activities. For me, every one of those things is on me. Taking out the trash, changing the bathroom canisters and things like this. And that adds up to probably 30, 40 minutes every day, which is not a big deal. It's not a problem, but it's going to be really nice to have help to distribute those daily mundane tasks that just have to happen.
Okay, and so what's been keeping you busy the most besides those daily mundane tasks?
Well, the main purpose, as you probably know, of the space station is to conduct science and research here, and that is what we're trying to get a little bit or a lot of that, as much as we can, every single day, and I think we've been doing a pretty good job. Now, there's certain times where maintenance on the space station has to take the upper hand, because if you don't maintain the station, you don't have the system in place to conduct the science. And tomorrow's a great example. We have a coolant pump that has been finicky for the last, I don't know, month or so, and it's finally on its last leg, and it's died. and so it's time to replace it. So tomorrow afternoon, my afternoon, morning in Houston, I will dive into a panel kind of right behind where this camera is, and turn some screws and unconnect some connectors, take out a bad thing and put a new thing in there, and we'll flip it back on. And that's the kind of thing that takes 4 hours. And I wouldn't say it takes away from the science, but keeping those things healthy are what enables us to do the science.
Okay, and so what are some of the tasks that Bob and Doug are going to help with? Do you have any science in mind that they will be useful for, or they'll be able to help when they get on board?
Well, I can think of lots of things that I need Bob and Doug to do, but not appropriate for the TV here. But no, I'm just joking. The workload for us is distributed between the three of us. There's a pile of work that has to happen every day. It's like a pie, and we just chop that pie up and we'll distribute it amongst the three of us. Now, that being said, they have had less ability to go to our international partners and receive training on some of those unique systems. For instance, I'm talking to you from the Japanese module. We have some training in Japan that enables us to do work and experiments here that they haven't done. Same thing with the European module. So some of those tasks will fall on me, and a lot of the American tasks will fall on Bob and Doug. And one of the big things that we have is a cargo ship called HTV, which launched yesterday, arrives on Monday, and it has a lot of cargo, and we'll have to dive in and start pulling those bags out and then filling up with trash. And I think that is going to be a lion's share of a job for mostly for the two of them, I think.
Okay, and for you, what's some of the science that is most exciting for you that you're working on at the moment?
I don't know if you can see, there's these two satellites right here called Astro-B, and it's been really fun to be part of working with these guys. They're remote controlled from the ground, and they fly around, and I helped get the initial navigation algorithms going last week, and then earlier today working with our Japanese colleagues who are going to have a student competition in the very near future with using these Astro-Bs. And by the way, that's in Japan, but the control for these Astro-Bs is in California, so very global in the nature of the coordination. This is one example. It's very visual and fun. There's lots of science that's happening that's behind racks that we can't see, but nonetheless equally as interesting.
Okay, and yeah, I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
You're welcome. And what's a picture from space without a little zero gravity representation there?
Station, this is Houston ACR. That concludes our event as we count down to 20 continuous years of humans living and working on the International Space Station. Thank you.
To all participants from Discovery Channel, CBS, and the Houston Chronicle. Station, we are now resuming operational audio communications.
Standing by for spacecraft moments from now. And this view now from the Range Control Center at Tanegashima. Applause as we have confirmation of spacecraft separation. The HTV-9 now in its preliminary orbit. A flawless launch and a flawless climb to orbit for the final HTV vehicle, now well on its way to the International Space Station. T-minus 14 seconds and counting, standing by for engine ignition. We have engine start.
Activating the thermal batteries. All systems are go.
And we have liftoff. A rising sun over the land of the rising sun as JAXA's H-2B rocket and the HTV-9 cargo craft take flight. Roll, pitch, and yaw program in effect. The H-2B rocket takes flight to the International Space Station.
Spacex at 2:31:00 a.m.
liftoff occurring right on the dot at 12:31 p.m. even Central Time, 2:31 a.m. Japan time. 44 seconds into the flight. Just passing 1 minute into the flight, everything continuing to look good.
ロケットは正常に飛行中であり、種子島の地上局は正常にロケットの追尾を行っています。
4 solid rocket boosters, 2 liquid fuel engines propelling the HTV-9 towards its preliminary orbit, coming up on the 1 minute 30 second mark into the flight. Coming up on the 2 minute mark into the flight, coming up on solid rocket booster shutdown and separation. And we have solid rocket booster jettison. Two and a half minutes into the flight. First stage engines are continuing to fire, as they will until about the 5 minute 46 second mark into the flight, at which point those engines will shut down. The first stage will separate. Three minutes, 10 seconds into the flight, everything proceeding normally. The first stage continues to burn in excellent shape. All good reports coming in from the Range Control Center at Tanegashima.
Velocity is approximately 1.9 kilometers per second.
Coming up on the 4 minute mark into the flight. About 2 minutes to go in first stage performance. The H-2B rocket is operating in normal fashion. Four and a half minutes into the flight, which has been flawless so far. Everything proceeding well. Good first stage performance. The solid rocket boosters that separated just over 2 minutes into the flight did their job in augmenting the dual first stage engines on the H-2B rocket. This is the final flight of the H-2B to be replaced with the new H-3 rocket that JAXA will be employing for its new genre of cargo craft called the HTV-X that is scheduled to launch about 2 years from now. 5 minutes, 5 seconds into the flight.
It's 5 minutes after the liftoff. ロケットは順調に飛行を続けており、現在の高度は約 155km、秒速約 4km です。The combustion of the first stage engine, attitude control, and trajectory are all normal.
The H2B flight is on course. Current altitude is about 155 kilometers. Velocity is approximately 4.0 kilometers per second.
Five minutes, 56 seconds into the flight.
The first stage engine cut off. Separation of the first and second stages.
And now we have confirmation of separation of the first and second stages. This is animation driven by real-time telemetry from the Range Control Center at Tanegashima. The second stage is now up and running. The single engine on the second stage is firing and will continue to do so for about 8.5 minutes, almost 9 minutes of performance. The second stage ignition occurred on time. The trajectory of the vehicle is reported to be perfect. Second stage engine cutoff will come at about the 14.5 minute mark into the flight. Telemetry from the H-2B rocket and the HTV-9 cargo ship being processed through a series of ground stations being employed by the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency on the trajectory of its flight. We're about 2 minutes away from the completion of second stage performance. And we have a report of second stage shutdown on time. We'll be standing by for spacecraft separation moments from now. And this view now from the Range Control Center at Tanegashima. Applause as we have confirmation of spacecraft separation. The HTV-9 now in its preliminary orbit. A flawless launch and a flawless climb to orbit for the final HTV vehicle, now well on its way to the International Space Station.
This is Mission Control Houston. Good morning. You're getting a live look at the HTV-9 vehicle at the end of the station's robotic arm, where it is being currently maneuvered into its berthing position. It will be attached to the International Space Station's Harmony module. This is the module at the very forward end of the International Space Station, and that's where it will remain for at least 2 months. Thanks for joining us here on Memorial Day. You're in the International Space Station Flight Control Room. Teams have just handed over to the Orbit 2 shift today, led by Flight Director Pooja Jasrani. Flight Director Pooja Jasrani is leading teams here through the berthing process after just being captured more than an hour ago at 7:13 a.m. Central Time, 8:13 a.m. Eastern, 9:13 p.m. in Japan. Pooja Jasrani as the flight director taking us through the process. To her right is Travis Fitzgerald, the Capcom. You'll be hearing his voice from here in Mission Control Houston, communicating with the Expedition 62 crew aboard the International Space Station. Currently on board is ISS Commander, International Space Station Commander Chris Cassidy, who just an hour ago used the station's robotic arm to maneuver in for capturing the HTV-9 vehicle for the last time. This HTV is the last of its generation. The next generation of HTV cargo craft, called the HTV-X, will be able to dock to the International Space Station, the international docking adapters on the forward end. Some equipment on the HTV-9 is being used to test the capabilities that are to be set forth by the HTV-X, including a wireless communication system on HTV-9 is called WILD. During its approach and rendezvous before capture, the WILD system was testing a Wi-Fi connection of data transmission through some of the external wireless ports on the outside of the International Space Station. HTV currently loaded with 4 tons of cargo. This includes almost 5,000 pounds of pressurized cargo, including some experiments and hardware, as well as some resupply of consumables, including water and nitrogen, and some fresh food. In the middle there is an unpressurized compartment containing a pallet of new lithium-ion batteries. There are 6 lithium-ion batteries with 6 associated adapter plates to complete the upgrades of batteries on the outside of the International Space Station. The space station itself has 8 power channels, 6 of which have been fully upgraded with brand new lithium-ion batteries over the past 3 years. The final set of lithium-ion batteries, these 6 carried by HTV-9, will be, once installed to the International Space Station, will be removed from HTV and set up for future spacewalks to install the final set of lithium-ion batteries on the S6 truss of the space station. This is the farthest starboard truss segment that contains the integrated electronics assembly. We'll be swapping out some of those old nickel-hydrogen batteries for the new lithium-ion. Space Station and HTV are currently just under 270 statute miles over the South Atlantic Ocean. The robotic arm is now in a hold position, part of the incremental movements at the controls of robotics officers on the ground. Some of those incremental movers to get it into its position on the nadir port of the Harmony module. This is the Earth-facing side of the module that's at the furthest forward port of the International Space Station. Just about an hour ago, HTV completed its 5-day rendezvous to the International Space Station, launching on May 20th, U.S. time. At 12:31 p.m. Central Time, 2:31 a.m. Japan time, HTV-9 lifted off atop of an H-2B rocket from the Yoshinobu Launch Complex in Tanegashima, one of the islands that is south of Japan. The 12-ton vehicle, containing 4 tons of cargo, made its ascent through the atmosphere into an orbit just 9 minutes later. It spent the last 5 days catching up with the International Space Station. Just this morning, going right on time through the predicted schedule of rendezvousing with the International Space Station. Astronaut Chris Cassidy inside the space station took control of the station's robotic arm, assisted by Ivan Wagner of Roscosmos. Was able to head in a little bit early, ahead of schedule, for capturing the HTV and its 4 tons of cargo at 7:13 a.m. Central Time, 8:13 a.m. Eastern. At the time, the International Space Station was 260 statute miles right over Tanzania of Africa. After HTV was successfully captured, words were shared by Cassidy himself as well as Leslie Ringo, the Capcom of the Orbit 1 shift in Mission Control Houston, and Norishige Kanai, who also, as a representative of JAXA, was stationed here in Mission Control Houston. The flight control teams here in Mission Control Houston have been working in tandem with the flight controllers in Tsukuba, Japan of HTV Flight Control. After Cassidy captured the HTV, right on time, 7:13 a.m. Central Time, he handed over control of the station's robotic arm to robotic officers here on the ground. From there, the robotic arm aboard station has been maneuvered remotely by controllers here on the ground, incrementally to its new berthing position on the nadir port of Harmony. We're now in a brief handover of communications, getting them back now as we speak. This will happen time to time throughout our coverage. Communications, video and audio from the space station come by way of geosynchronous satellites called TDRS satellites, tracking and data relay satellites. They're positioned in geosynchronous points across the globe, handing over from satellite to satellite as the station and HTV fly 17,500 miles per hour around the Earth every 90 minutes. Another handover of those tracking and data relay satellites. Again, that will happen incrementally throughout today's coverage of the berthing, the final berthing of HTV to the International Space Station. Again, future generations of HTV cargo vehicles will dock to the International Space Station's international docking adapters. There are 2 of them on the forward end of the space station. At this time, the arm is in motion, making another one of those incremental movements towards its the HTV's berthing position at the Node 2 Harmony module, the Earth-facing side. Berthing takes a little bit of a different coordination from docking. Docking can be accomplished automatically. Essentially, a vehicle can fly right into the docking interface of the International Space Station and attach itself. It's a little bit of a faster process. Berthing requires the vehicle to hover at a capture position. For the case of this vehicle, HTV-9 was 9.2 meters away from the station to be captured by the space station's robotic arm. It's then maneuvered into a port called the Common Berthing Mechanism, where it's attached by 4 latches and 16 bolts to secure it to the International Space Station. That Common Berthing Mechanism has a little bit of a wider hatch than the docking ports have. So berthing was especially common during the early phases of International Space Station assembly when large racks had to be brought through these common berthing mechanisms. Arm is currently in motion, slowly but surely maneuvering to that common berthing mechanism. Space Station and HTV flying 262 statute miles over the southern Atlantic Ocean on a northeasterly course heading towards the west coast of Africa. This is Mission Control Houston at the end of the station's robotic arm. This gold structure, rather, you see at the end there is the HTV-9. The robotic arm is currently in motion. This is one of the largest, if not the largest, cargo vehicle that makes trips to the International Space Station. HTV-9 coming in at just about 12 tons total. Slow incremental movements are necessary for these robotic operations. The arm is in motion. One of the one of several incremental motions to get it into its berthing position. Right now, the space station is flying 260 statute miles over the Atlantic Ocean. There in the distance, you're seeing the west coast of the African country of Gabon. From this view, you can see a little bit more clearly some of those very subtle movements of the robotic arm to maneuver the HTV into place. This view coming from the common berthing mechanism. This is a camera facing down towards the window that's at the center of the hatch. A hatch which astronaut Chris Cassidy aboard the International Space Station will later open to reveal the nearly 5,000 pounds of pressurized cargo inside HTV. The robotic arm will continue to maneuver HTV to essentially line up with the common berthing mechanism, then incrementally push closer towards a position that'll turn the things called ready to latch indicators green. These indicators indicate that HTV is lined up and that the latches can be driven to hold HTV in place. There are 4 latches at the end of this common berthing mechanism that'll hold HTV in place, as well as 16 bolts. From this view, you can get a good look at that open compartment towards the center of the vehicle and the left. The gap there is revealing the external pallet. This is the unpressurized portion of HTV. That pallet contains 6 new lithium-ion batteries and associated adapter plates. The pallet's mounted to the unpressurized portion, which is open and exposed to the vacuum of space. Once HTV is attached and officially berthed, robotics officers will be able to maneuver the station's arm and a special dexterous manipulator unit called Dexter that'll be at the end of the robotic arm. Dexter will pull out the external pallet containing the 6 new lithium-ion batteries and get it staged over on the station's truss so that they can be installed later via spacewalks. There's also an external pallet currently on the space station full of old nickel hydrogen batteries from the Port 6 truss that were wrapped up earlier this year in January. HTV continuing to maneuver into its berthing position. Robotics officers lining it up right with the common berthing mechanism. Station and HTV flying at 259 statute miles right over the Sahara. This again is a view of the hatch of the HTV from the common berthing mechanism of the space station. That common berthing mechanism has a series of hardware to officially mate the HTV with the International Space Station.
Houston Station on 2 for timeline.
Go ahead, Chris.
Hey, Travis, welcome to work. Are you able to accept any of those next activities, all the series of things after my midday meal on the plan? Can you take them now, or should I just wait till they come up on the timeline?
Actually, the first 4 you can do now. And when you get to the Dragon Tools teardown, I've got a additional request for you.
Okay. Dragon Tools teardown, that's the first one, so you might as well send it to me now.
Okay, so when you get there, when you're done with the Dragon Tools teardown, we'd like you to plug in the REM USB, and it can go in any USB except the back left. How copy?
Copy all.
And I do have one quick go back for the timeline. We are not ready to deactivate the lab HD camcorder yet.
Okay, no problem. Just maybe whenever you are, just give me a radio call. That'd be great.
Will do.
You're hearing Chris Cassidy aboard the International Space Station get through his workday. As station and HTV fly right over Egypt, you're seeing the Nile River back there in the background. The external pallet containing the new lithium-ion batteries coming clear into view on the left there, that white box structure towards the center of the vehicle. Cassidy, you're hearing work through his workday. He has some preparations to work through the pressurization and leak checking once HTV is berthed to the International Space Station. You're also hearing him do some prep work for the Demo 2 launch. Just 2 days from now, Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley will lift off from the coast of Florida. The first times humans will launch from the coast of the U.S. in 9 years. Of course, he's got preparations for welcoming his 2 NASA astronaut crewmates scheduled to launch on the 27th, arrive at the space station May 28th, this Thursday. But of course, one of the items on Cassidy's to-do list for the early parts of this week will be opening up the hatch of the HTV and revealing the 5,000 pounds of pressurized cargo that's inside. HTV finishing up this robotics maneuver to line up with the common berthing mechanism, now holding. Again, this is one of the incremental steps for HTV to berth. Once it does berth, it'll be berthed in 2 stages. Second stage will be the official berthing, when all 4 latches are driven and 16 bolts are in place. With that, good checkouts from that held position. Arm is now moving once again. This movement closing in on the common berthing mechanism. You'll see it get closer to the International Space Station as the station flies 261 statute miles with HTV at the end of the robotic arm right over Syria. Robotic arm is in motion, pushing HTV closer to the common berthing mechanism. Again, this will be an incremental step. It'll pause a little bit before it actually goes all the way to touch with the common berthing mechanism and turn those ready-to latch indicators green.
Station Houston, Space Ground 2 for Chris. You do have a go to deactivate the lab camcorder at your convenience. And just to confirm, we do not have a go for the Node 2 CBCS camera removal yet.
Copy all.
You're seeing HTV get a little bit closer to the common berthing mechanism. In the background there is the Caspian Sea, the station, and HTV flying 262 statute miles. Heading on a northeasterly course, we'll soon be passing over Baikonur, Kazakhstan. It was from Baikonur that just last month, it was Chris Cassidy, NASA astronaut, as well as two Roscosmos cosmonauts, Ivan Wagner and Anatoly Ivanishin, lifted off from that very same place to their new home aboard the International Space Station. Another handover of video and audio communications from the International Space Station. Again, this will happen incrementally throughout today's coverage. Video and audio coming via geosynchronous satellites. They're called tracking and data relay satellites stationed in geosynchronous points about 23,000 miles away from Earth, but across the equator. At this time, the robotic arm has finished its incremental movement, now holding. Robotics officers on the ground will verify its position, make sure it's good to go before proceeding with the next set of movements. International Space Station now flying 262 statute miles right over Baikonur, Kazakhstan.
Houston Station on 2.
Go ahead.
Just want to confirm we no longer have a cupola window 2 constraint. I don't see it in the crew band. I'm just double checking.
That is correct. The constraint no longer applies.
Copy, thanks.
You were just hearing International Space Station Commander Chris Cassidy speaking with Travis Fitzgerald, who is the Capcom here in Mission Control Houston. During the rendezvous phase of HTV's flight to the International Space Station, there are several constraints, mainly safety precautions. But the cupola is a 7-bay window on the space station that looks right down on the Earth and provides a really good view of especially Earth observation research opportunities. During visiting vehicle rendezvous operations, traditionally these windows are closed. Now that HTV has arrived at the space station at the hands of the robotic arm. Some of these constraints of closing the shutters to those windows have now been lifted. The Orbit 2 team here in Mission Control Houston, led by Flight Director Pooja Jasrani, taking us through the operations to maneuver HTV for berthing to the International Space Station. We're expected to recover some video from the International Space Station here in the next few minutes. Once we do regain the video, you'll start to see the Earth in the background of HTV start to get a little bit darker. Station is heading towards the Terminator line into an orbital nighttime, passing over the southern border of Russia and then soon over Mongolia. This is Mission Control Houston. Again, you're getting a live view of the inside of the International Space Station flight control room. Should be regaining video from the International Space Station shortly. In the meantime, HTV is loaded with about 4 tons of cargo. About 5,000 pounds of which is pressurized cargo containing food, cargo, supplies, some hardware and experiments, as well as some consumable resupply, including water, new fresh water, and some nitrogen resupply tanks. Some of the research on board, particularly the research sponsored by the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, or JAXA. There's one experiment called JAXA ELF. It stands for Electrostatic Levitation Furnace. This facility is able to suspend different materials in space at the benefit of the microgravity environment and expose it to different thermal conditions. Some of the materials that are being tested on board the International Space Station include some materials that could help with future space exploration initiatives, including some turbine blade materials, spacecraft external shell materials, and a glass-forming alloy. Now regaining some of that video from the space station, you can already see as the space station flies over the southern border of Russia. We're in an orbital nighttime now. We'll soon, the sun will stop illuminating the HTV and International Space Station that are flying 250 miles above the Earth.
Station Houston, Space to Ground 2. We're a little bit ahead on the timeline, so the no exercise constraint now applies. So no exercise right now, please.
Yeah.
You just heard Capcom Travis Fitzgerald notify the crew of the International Space Station of an exercise constraint. There are several exercise equipment facilities on board the International Space Station, including a hydraulic piece of equipment that simulates weightlifting. There's also a treadmill and a stationary bicycle. Some of these pieces of equipment can cause little bits of vibration throughout the station, so to keep a steady attitude control throughout the duration of the berthing process, the station will withhold on any exercise until HTV is officially berthed to the International Space Station. At this point, the International Space Station has switched its attitude control, disabling some of the thrusters on the U.S. side to prevent any plumes from interacting with the outside of the HTV. Motion is resuming on the International Space Station's robotic arm. It will be slow and incremental, but you'll be able to see HTV get a little bit closer to its berthing port, lined up right now directly in front of the nadir berthing port. This is the port on the very forward end of the International Space Station facing towards the Earth. We're still getting a little illumination from the sun. We'll start to see that go away as the station and HTV heading towards the northeastern portion of China, and the sun begins to set over the horizon. From this view, a camera pointing right down towards the center of the common berthing mechanism. You can see the hatch of the HTV. You can see that very slow incremental movement.
Houston Station for procedure 2.805, I'm checking with you about embedded RF things. Radio's off.
Yeah, we copy, Chris. The RFID readers are off. You may proceed to 1.2.
can see the sunlight no longer illuminating the HTV hatch. Some of the lights reflecting off the glass of the common berthing mechanism's small center window. Still good movement and alignment from the robotic arm, pushing HTV right into place. There's going to be another pause before it's pushed in for its final movement. Again, berthing is a two-stage process. First, the ready to latch indicators will turn green and 4 latches will secure HTV in place. It'll be officially berthed once all 16 bolts have been driven for second stage berthing. HTV now holding for one of those incremental checks. This is Mission Control Houston. HTV currently being held right in front of the common berthing mechanism. Robotics officers on the ground checking the alignment, making sure everything is okay before they make that final push. Again, HTV still holding, waiting for checks of a good alignment before making that final push to meet up with the common berthing mechanism and get ready for ready-to-latch indicators. At this time, the International Space Station flying 261 statute miles, a few hundred miles east off the coast of Tanegashima, where just 5 days ago, HTV launched from the Yoshinobu Launch Complex. Station's robotic arm now proceeding with that final movement to line up HTV with the ready-to-latch indicators. This will be the final robotic movement to push HTV into place right in front of the common berthing mechanism for official berthing to the International Space Station. Again, berthing happens in stages. So first stage will be when ready-to-latch indicators are green. They'll drive 4 latches and secure 16 bolts. And that'll hold HTV in place for an official second stage berthing, where HTV will be officially mated to the space station. In the meantime, robotic arm pushing in HTV for that final maneuver. Robotic arm now holding HTV. Waiting for confirmation of 4 green ready to latch indicators. And we got confirmation of 4 green ready to latch indicators. Common berthing mechanism now being configured for first stage berthing. Again, we need 4 latches and 16 bolts driven to complete second stage berthing. This is Mission Control Houston. If you're just tuning in, you're looking from the inside of the International Space Station, pointing right down towards the hatch of the HTV-9. At this time, the final robotic movement has been completed. We have 4 ready-to-latch indicators and are proceeding with first stage capture, or first stage berthing, of HTV to the International Space Station. There are 2 stages needed to complete the berthing of HTV to the International Space Station. By the end of second stage, we'll have 4 latches and 16 bolts securing HTV to the International Space Station.